Imagine finally realizing your dream of moving into a new house. But when night falls, every wall begins to whisper secrets that no one should hear. Have you ever felt that feeling that something is watching you even when you are alone? In this true story, you will discover the horrors that can be hidden in a seemingly perfect home. Prepare to feel the chills down your spine and understand how to face the darkest mysteries within four walls. Stay until the end to find out the outcome, and who knows, learn how to prevent this from happening to you. Let's go to the first story. The House of Night Whispers. The night was clear when Paula and Roberto parked the moving truck in front of their new house. It was the beginning of an exciting chapter in their lives. A newly built house with impeccable white walls, large windows that let the sun flood the rooms, and a spacious backyard where they planned to grow a garden. They had worked hard to achieve their dream, and now, finally, it was coming true. As they unloaded the boxes, their first impressions of the place were of tranquility. The house was surrounded by a newly developed neighborhood, with few lights at night and an almost comforting silence. But as the night wore on and the silence deepened, the mood changed. After a quick dinner, they decided to start organizing the basics. Paula went up and down the stairs with clothes and utensils, while Roberto assembled the furniture in the living room. It was during one of these comings and goings that she heard it for the first time, a slight creaking sound coming from upstairs. "Did you leave any windows open?" she asked, hurrying down the last few steps. "No, they were all locked when I checked earlier," Roberto replied, without looking up from the instruction manual. At first, they both laughed. Maybe it was just the wood of the new house settling in, or a strange echo caused by the emptiness of the rooms. But the second time, the sound was clearer. A long, dragging sound, as if something was being pulled across the floor. Paula stopped halfway up the stairs, holding her breath. She looked up at the ceiling, but nothing seemed out of place. The sound was coming from one of the bedrooms at the end of the hallway. She tried to push away the thought that something was wrong. Roberto, sensing her uneasiness, went up the hallway. With her, flashlight in hand, he opened each door only to find the rooms empty. "You must be imagining it. The house is still full of echoes," he said, trying to ease the tension. But the third time, the sound was no longer a simple creak. It was a dull thud, as if something had fallen hard on the floor. This time, Roberto heard it too. The two exchanged a worried look. "We'd better go to sleep. We're tired. Tomorrow, with daylight, everything will seem more normal," he suggested, trying to stay calm. In bed, however, sleep seemed impossible. The room was freezing despite the heat outside. And then, right in the middle of the night, Paula woke up with a start. She felt a pressure on her chest, as if something invisible was sitting on her. A few meters away near the door, the sound started again, shuffling footsteps coming and going down the hallway. She nudged Roberto hard, but he seemed trapped in a deep sleep, almost as if he were anesthetized. Feeling a cold that went beyond the temperature, Paula gathered the courage to sit up in bed. "Who's there?" she asked in a low voice, her voice trembling. The only answer was the sound of the bedroom door being slowly pushed open, creaking as if someone was on the other side. The air was heavy, and Paula could barely breathe. She reached out to turn on the lamp, but before she could, a loud, definitive sound echoed through the house. A low, deep, inhuman laugh coming from somewhere that could not be identified. The night, which had seemed to promise tranquility and new beginnings, became a never-ending nightmare. Hey, before we continue with the video, just make sure you're already subscribed to the channel, because here we're going to bring you a series of videos like this one with incredible, terrifying stories for you. We continue. The next morning, Paula and Roberto were exhausted. The night had been long and disturbing, but neither of them wanted to admit how scared they were. It was just tiredness, they thought, trying to rationalize the events of the previous night. They decided to spend the day unpacking and putting everything in order, hoping that an organized house would bring some sense of normalcy. Around noon, while Paula was organizing the kitchen cabinets, she heard the unmistakable sound of something rolling across the floor. Turning quickly, she saw one of the pans she had placed on the counter now in the middle of the room. The pan was still, but the movement still seemed recent, as if it had just been pushed. "Roberto, did you leave the windows open?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but her voice betrayed the tension. "No, I closed them all." "Why?" He answered from the other side of the house, where he was rummaging through some boxes. She shrugged, trying to convince herself that maybe the pan had slipped on its own. But minutes later, something else happened. This time, it was a glass, which fell from the drainer as if an invisible hand had pushed it. It didn't just fall. It flew to the floor with unexpected force, shattering into pieces. Paula stood there, looking at the shards on the floor. She felt a chill run down her spine. Something was wrong, but she didn't want to seem paranoid. She picked up the broom and started cleaning, pretending nothing had happened. In the living room, Roberto also began to notice strange things. One of the paintings he had hung on the wall was now on the floor, but the way it had fallen made no sense. The glass was intact, and the painting was resting perfectly against the wall, as if it had been carefully placed there. He picked it up and hung it again, but when he turned back, he heard a plode behind him. The painting had fallen again, in the exact same place. "Paula, are you touching the paintings?" he asked, his tone already irritated. "Of course not," she replied, still trying to deal with the broken glass in the kitchen. The day was filled with small incidents. One of the pieces of furniture in the living room seemed to have moved when no one was looking. The television turned on by itself for a few seconds, emitting only static before turning off again. A draft of cold air circulated through the hallway, even with all the doors and windows closed. That afternoon, while they were organizing the guest room, Roberto found something that made his heart race. Inside one of the drawers of the closet was an old notebook with a worn leather cover and yellowed pages. He opened it, finding handwritten notes with crooked and messy letters. "This house, it belongs to them now." Roberto frowned. "And Paula, come see this." She walked into the room, drying her hands with a dish towel. When she read the words in the notebook, she felt a sense of nausea. Who were they? Why would someone leave something like that there? As the couple leafed through the notebook, the words became stranger and more disturbing. They described sleepless nights, unexplained noises, and the constant feeling of being watched. At the end, one last sentence was underlined several times. "Never look directly into a mirror at night." At that moment, a loud crash echoed through the hallway, as if something heavy had fallen to the floor. Paula and Roberto froze, exchanging looks of pure terror. "What was that?" Paula whispered, her voice breaking. "I think we need to see," Roberto said, but his courage seemed to slip away with each word. They left the room and found the hallway empty, but the air was heavier than ever. A decorative mirror hanging on the wall was cracked, as if something had hit it hard, and reflected in the broken glass, Paula swore she saw a figure pass quickly behind them. When she turned around, there was nothing. Only the silence of the house, which now seemed less inviting than ever. After a restless night, Paula and Roberto decided it was time to explore every corner of the house. The unexplained occurrences had them on edge, and the one area they hadn't yet investigated was the attic. Up until that point, they had both avoided going up there. It wasn't just the dust or the mess. There was something about the idea of exploring that space that made them uncomfortable. "We have to go up there, Roberto. We can't keep living like this, afraid of our own home," Paula said, trying to look brave but holding his arm tightly. "Okay, but let's go." "During the day," he replied, holding a flashlight as if it could ward off whatever was hiding in the attic. They positioned the ladder and opened the small door that led to the space above. A wave of stuffy, heavy air descended, bringing with it the smell of aged wood and something else. Something metallic and slightly sweet, like dried blood. You smell that? Paula asked, wrinkling her nose. I do, but let's go quickly. The sooner we find out what's in here, the better. The attic was cramped, with exposed wooden beams and old boxes scattered across the dusty floor. The light from Roberto's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing objects covered in white sheets that looked like ghosts frozen in time. As Paula rummaged through one of the boxes, she found old photos of the house. The pictures showed a family that seemed happy, father, mother, and 2 children. However, in one of the photos, something caught his attention. Behind the family, there was a dark figure, like a shadow, watching from the attic window. Roberto, look at this. She showed him the photo, her eyes wide. He frowned, trying to rationalize. It must just be a flaw in the photo, nothing serious. But before they could argue any further, something caught his attention. A large trunk in the corner of the attic with rusty chains wrapped around it. This looks like something out of a horror movie, Roberto said, trying to ease the tension, but his voice was shaky. I think we should open it. Paula was hesitant, but curiosity was stronger. They used a tool they found in the garage to break the chains. The sound of metal echoed in the empty space, making both of them shiver. When the trunk finally opened, the air seemed to grow heavier. Inside, there was a stained child's dress, a porcelain doll with a disturbing look in its eyes, and a small, worn notebook. Paula carefully picked up the notebook and began to leaf through it. The pages were filled with grotesque drawings, human shadows with empty eyes, hands reaching out of walls, and children surrounded by figures. At the end of the notebook was a note. They don't rest, they watch. And when you see them, it's already too late. Suddenly, a loud noise came from beneath them, as if something had fallen downstairs. The doll inside the trunk turned its head slightly, and the two froze. Let's get out of here, now! Roberto grabbed Paula's hand, and the two of them hurried down the stairs. However, when they reached the bottom floor, the room was completely different. The furniture was out of place, the lights were flickering, and the windows, which had previously been closed, were now banging violently in the wind. And then they saw it. In the reflection of the switched-off television, the same dark figure from the photo was standing behind them. Without a second thought, Paula and Roberto ran out of the house, leaving everything behind. When she glanced at the attic window before getting into the car, Paula saw the figure once again, watching them. But this time it seemed to be smiling. They never went back to that house again, but the feeling of being watched never completely left them. Sometimes, in the silence of the night, Roberto swore he heard the sound of light footsteps, as if someone were walking down the hallway, even though he was in a new apartment. After escaping from the house that had nearly destroyed their sanity, Paula and Roberto started their life over in an apartment in the city center. They chose a small place, with no attic or basement, and as far away from rural areas as possible. Every corner of the apartment was lit, with no room for mysterious shadows or hidden corners. Paula found a new job, and Roberto dedicated himself to renovating his car, trying to occupy his mind with mechanical and practical activities. However, they both knew that the past had not been completely left behind. It was a quiet night when Paula, while organizing boxes that they had brought from their old house, found something that should not be there: the notebook with the grotesque drawings. She was sure that she had left that item in the old house, inside the trunk that she never wanted to see again. Roberto, that's impossible. I didn't bring that here. Her voice was trembling, and she held the notebook as if it were a piece of burning coal. It must be some other notebook like it. Let me fix it. Roberto took the notebook and threw it in the trash, but deep down he felt the same chill he had felt in the attic of the house. Days passed and little things began to happen. Light noises in the hallway, lights flashing for no reason, and doors that seemed to open by themselves. Roberto tried to ignore them, but Paula was convinced that something had followed them. One night, while they were watching a movie in the living room, the intercom rang. Roberto went to answer it, but the video screen was dark. There was no one there. "It must be a defect," he said, trying to reassure Paula. "Or maybe not." Her answer came in a whisper, almost inaudible. Later that same night, while they were lying in bed, Roberto woke up to a strange noise. It was like someone was dragging something heavy across the floor. He got up slowly, grabbing a flashlight. Paula was still asleep, so he didn't want to alarm her. He followed the sound into the living room. When he got there, he saw the notebook again, in the center of the dining table. The pages were open, and a new sentence had been written. "Do you think you can escape?" Roberto felt his blood run cold. At that moment, Paula appeared at the door, holding her cell phone with trembling hands. "Did you hear that?" she asked. "No." "What was it?" "A laugh. It came from the hallway." Together, they decided to leave the apartment and spend the night in a hotel. What they didn't know was that no matter how hard they tried to run away, whatever was chasing them wasn't limited to places. At the hotel, while they were trying to calm down, the room phone rang. Roberto answered it, and on the other end of the line, a low, hoarse voice whispered, "You can't run forever." They never found out how the notebook reappeared or how the voices and noises followed them, but they knew they were trapped in a cycle that seemed impossible to break. So, have you ever heard of horror stories in new homes? Leave a comment with what you know about it, and if you believe in these stories. Continuing. After so many sleepless nights, desperate changes, and the constant fear that seemed to stick to their skin, Paula and Roberto finally understood. The real terror was not in the house or in the notebook, but in the shadow they carried inside themselves. Every unexpected knock, every out-of-place noise was a reminder that the supernatural respects no borders or walls. As they tried to rebuild their lives, they realized that perhaps some stories don't have an ending, only a new beginning, a cycle that challenges us to face our deepest fears. And now I ask you who have come this far. What if something similar happened to you? A presence that seems to be everywhere but never fully reveals itself. This is just one of the many scary stories that can be hidden in the most common places. Stories that make you question what is real and what is imaginary. If you are intrigued, curious, or even feel that chill down your spine, be sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who loves a good mystery. Here every week, we explore the most sinister, disturbing, and intriguing in the world of horror. Press the bell so you don't miss the next episodes, because the next one might be even darker, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next story. But be careful. Some things might follow you. Let's go to the second story, The House That Never Shut Up. Have you ever felt that chill down your spine when you enter a new place? What if I told you that this family, when moving into their dream house, found something far beyond what they could have imagined? Unexplained sounds, ancient secrets, and a frightening presence that seemed to never want to leave them alone. Today, we're going to reveal a chilling story full of mysteries that will make you think twice before opening that door that should never be opened. Stay until the end to find out what really happened, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more disturbing stories like this one. The move had been tiring, and the Cartwrights were exhausted. After a long day of packing boxes, assembling furniture, and exploring every nook and cranny of their newly purchased home, the family was finally getting ready for bed. It was a large two-story house made of dark wood, the kind of place that told stories just by looking at it. Although it had a rustic charm, the silence here was so profound that it seemed to swallow every sound. While the parents, Laura and Richard, were putting the finishing touches on the master bedroom, their two children, Emily and Lucas, were already tucked in under the covers. Emily, 12, was reading an adventure book while Lucas, 8, struggled to keep his eyes open. The wind outside was making the windows rattle slightly, and despite the apparent tranquility, there was something strange about the night. When the lights finally went out, the silence became absolute. There was no sound of crickets, no sound of wind blowing through the trees. It was the kind of stillness that made anyone uneasy, as if the air were too thick to breathe. Laura woke, up around 2 in the morning with the feeling that something was wrong. She opened her eyes and noticed that the lamp next to her bed was flickering, even though it was turned off. At the same time, Richard was tossing and turning in bed, mumbling something in a low, disjointed tone, as if he were having a bad dream. Laura shook him gently, but he didn't wake up. That was when she heard it, light footsteps in the hallway. Small and uneven, as if someone were dragging their feet across the hardwood floor. She stood up carefully, trying not to make a sound. When she opened the bedroom door, the hallway was plunged into darkness. The only light came from a small crack in Emily and Lucas's room, where the lamp was still on. But something was different. The silence was so profound that it seemed to amplify every beat of her heart. She stepped forward and noticed marks on the floor, fine scratches, as if something had been dragged there. Taking a deep breath, she walked to the children's room. When she opened the door, she saw Emily standing by the window, staring out at the garden. "Emily, what are you doing up at this hour?" Laura whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. Emily turned her head slowly, her eyes wide and filled with something Laura couldn't decipher. "There's someone out there, Mom. They're looking at the house." Laura glanced quickly out the window but saw nothing but darkness. "You must have imagined it. Let's go back to bed." Emily hesitated before lying down, but didn't say anything else. But when Laura turned to leave the room, she heard Emily murmur softly, almost as a warning. "He said he doesn't like noise." The silence of that first night had never seemed so threatening as it did at that moment. The next morning, the sun shone brightly, dispelling some of the uneasiness that had lingered during the night. Laura decided to take advantage of the day to explore the neighborhood and get to know the surroundings of the property. Meanwhile, Richard planned to organize the basement and check on some renovations that the house seemed to need. Emily and Lucas, on the other hand, ran around the vast backyard, now more lively and comfortable under the daylight. The house was in a secluded area, surrounded by fields and a few trees. There were no neighbors in sight, but in the distance, Laura noticed a small trail of smoke rising between the treetops, indicating that there was another house nearby. After breakfast, she decided to follow that trail until she found its source. The end of the path, she saw a small wooden cabin, worn by time with peeling paint. There was an old swing hanging from a nearby tree and a thin-looking dog lying on the porch, which looked up at the sight of her. Before she could get any closer, the door of the cabin creaked open, revealing an elderly man of peculiar appearance. He was tall and thin, with skin marked by time. He wore simple clothes and a worn hat that partially shaded his face, but not enough to hide the intense, piercing eyes that seemed to analyze her every move. "Good morning," Laura said, trying to sound friendly. "I'm Laura. I just moved into the house nearby." The man remained silent for a moment that seemed like an eternity. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and slurred. "You picked the wrong house." The answer left her disconcerted. "What do you mean? The house had been on the market for months. It seemed perfect for our family." He gave her a slight smile, but not in a welcoming way. "It always seems perfect at first, but no one stays there for long." Laura felt a chill run down her spine. "Why? Is there something wrong with the house?" The man tilted his head slightly, as if choosing his words carefully. Some stories shouldn't be told. Some presences don't like to be disturbed. Before Laura could ask more, he turned and walked into the cabin, closing the door behind him without another word. As much as she tried to ignore it, the feeling that he knew something important haunted her for the rest of the day. When she returned home, she found Richard in the basement, visibly pale. He was holding something in his hands, an old, leather-bound journal. I found this while I was organizing things downstairs. It's from someone who used to live here. And Laura, you need to read it. She opened the diary, and the dusty words told a story of unexplained events, sounds, shadows, and something more sinister that seemed to lurk within the walls of the house. As night fell, the neighbors' words echoed in Laura's mind. The idea that they had chosen the wrong house now seemed not just a superstition, but an actual warning. That night, the house seemed quieter than ever, but the silence was anything but comforting. Laura and Richard sat in the living room discussing the contents of the diary they had found in the basement. Each page recounted disturbing events that the former residents had experienced. Footsteps in the middle of the night, whispers in the hallways, and repeatedly mentions of a door upstairs that never stayed closed. "Which door?" Laura asked, quickly flipping through the pages. Richard pointed to the top of the stairs, the one in the room at the end of the hall. "I tried to lock it earlier today, but the doorknob just kept turning on its own." They both walked up the stairs slowly, each step creaking beneath their feet. The hallway seemed longer at night. Shadows, dancing on the walls, lit only by the faint glow of a lamp at the end of the hall. When they reached the door mentioned in the diary, they noticed something strange. Although Richard had closed and locked the door, it was now ajar, as if inviting someone in. Laura hesitated, but Richard pushed the door open carefully, revealing the empty room. There was nothing out of the ordinary at first glance, just an old bed and a wooden wardrobe. But the air inside was different, thicker, almost suffocating. "Let's lock this again," Laura said uneasily. They closed the door and turned the key in the lock. Richard even placed a chair against the doorknob to make sure no one could open it. However, just as they turned to leave, they heard a click. "It can't be," Richard murmured. The door was ajar again. Laura swallowed hard, a mixture of fear and disbelief taking over her. They tried again. They closed the door, locked it, and even placed a wardrobe in front of it. This time, they went downstairs without looking back. Hours later, as they were trying to sleep, they were awakened by a distinct sound, the creak of a door being opened. Laura sat up in bed, her heart racing. "Did you hear that?" Richard nodded, pale. Grabbing a flashlight, he led the way down the hallway again. The door was wide open now, swinging slightly as if an invisible breeze had pushed it open. Before they could react, they heard something coming from the bedroom. A low, uneven sound, like someone was breathing hard. "Is anyone here?" Richard called, his voice thick with tension. The flashlight illuminated every corner of the room, but there was no one there. Still, the sound continued. It seemed to be coming from inside the closet. Laura grabbed Richard's arm. "Don't open it. I need to know what's going on." He approached slowly, the sound getting louder with each step. With one swift movement, Richard opened the closet doors. It was empty, except for deep marks on the inside walls, as if fingernails had scratched the wood repeatedly. Before they could process what they were seeing, the lights flickered and a cold wind rushed through the room. The bedroom door slammed shut, locking them inside. The walls seemed to vibrate and a low whisper filled the air. Laura closed her eyes, muttering a prayer, as Richard desperately tried to open the door. Finally, with a snap, the door gave way and they ran out of the room, down the stairs as quickly as they could. When they reached the living room, the front door was open, swinging in the wind. A silent reminder that in this house, certain things should never be disturbed. Even after they had managed to fall asleep, the sound of the door upstairs continued to haunt them, opening and closing on its own, as if an unseen presence was determined never to leave it locked. 4. The mirror game. The next morning, Laura decided it was time to investigate further. She remembered something she had read in her diary about the mirror in the living room and how it was connected to the strange occurrences in the house. When she returned to the living room, she stopped in front of the large gilt-framed mirror that took up much of one wall. There was something sinister about it, as if it were more than just a reflection. Do you also feel like it's watching you? Laura asked Richard, who looked as uncomfortable as she did. It's just a mirror, he replied, though his voice betrayed a hint of doubt. Laura decided to clean it, since it was covered in a light layer of dust. When he wiped the surface with the cloth, he noticed something peculiar. The reflected image seemed delayed. It wasn't exactly a visual echo, but an almost imperceptible discrepancy that made his heart race. In the bottom corner of the frame, Laura found an inscription in almost faded letters. "What you see can see you too." That was definitely not in the welcome manual, Richard joked, trying to ease the tension. Laura, curious and at the same time restless, decided to test the mirror. She placed an object, a mug, in front of it and stared. When she removed the mug, the reflection remained for a few seconds before disappearing. It was then that she remembered another passage in the diary. "The mirror tests the brave. Do not play with it unless you are prepared for what will be revealed." "This must be a game," Laura said, her curiosity overcoming her fear. Richard frowned. "Laura, I think we should stop. This diary seems more like a warning than a game." But Laura was already positioned in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. "If this is a game, I want to know the rules." She held Richard's hand, trying to convince him to stay by her side. "If anything happens, we will be together." Laura concentrated and almost instinctively recited the words in the diary. "Mirror, mirror, reveal what is hidden but should never be seen." The light in the room seemed to dim. The frame of the mirror began to vibrate, and the reflection staring back at them was no longer exactly their own. It was a distorted version, as if something from another world were watching them. Laura's reflection tilted its head, smiling strangely. She looked at Richard, but her reflection was not there. "Richard?" Her voice shook. "I'm here," he replied. But in the mirror, Laura was alone. Suddenly, the reflection reached out through the glass. An ominous crack spread across the surface, and a low, groaning sound echoed through the room. Laura tried to pull away, but she seemed hypnotized. "Laura, get out of there!" Richard shouted, pulling her by the arm. With a loud bang, the mirror exploded into pieces, the shards scattering across the floor. However, in its place now stood something different, a portal that seemed to pulse with dark energy, like a giant eye. In the background, shadows moved, and the sound of whispers grew louder and louder. Laura and Richard stepped back, but something seemed to be holding them there. The portal began to close slowly, but before it disappeared, a figure emerged, a humanoid shadow with glowing eyes. It stood still for a few seconds before disappearing along with the portal. The mirror was intact again, as if nothing had happened, but one thing was certain: the house would never be the same again. And Laura and Richard knew that something had crossed over into their world, something that shouldn't be there. So have you ever heard of horror stories in new houses? Leave a comment with what you know about it and if you believe in these stories. Continuing, Laura and Richard knew they needed answers. The mirror, the diary, the distorted reflections. Everything pointed to something much bigger, something that the house had been hiding for decades. Searching the attic again, they found a small, rusty key inside an old envelope. On the paper was written in shaky letters, just one word: discover. The key led them to a hidden door behind a false wall in the basement. Opening it, they entered a small room lit only by the light of candles that were still burning, as if someone had lit them moments before. In the center was a wooden chest, adorned with eerie carvings. When they opened it, the house's past revealed itself. Faded photographs of a family that never appeared in the deeds, diaries that detailed strange and disturbing practices, and at the bottom, a letter addressed to anyone who dares to live here. In the letter, the former owner confessed to having made a dark pact to save his family from an impending tragedy. But there was a price the house would never forget, and anyone who lived there would bear the weight of the agreement. Suddenly, the room began to shake, and the humanoid shadow they had seen in the mirror re-emerged, more corporeal and menacing. It advanced slowly, but at the same time, it seemed trapped in the past that was now being unearthed. Laura clutched the letter tightly and, without thinking, threw it at the candles, burning the last link between the shadow and the house. A deafening scream echoed through the walls before everything returned to silence. The house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. But Laura and Richard knew that the story did not end there. They were free, or at least they thought they were. And so another dark mystery has been unraveled, but has it all really come to an end? The shadows that haunt the past of old houses can be silenced, but never forgotten. If you were intrigued by this story, just imagine how many more secrets are hidden out there, waiting to be revealed. We want to thank you for following this scary story with us. And if you like stories like this, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell to receive notifications. Here, secrets never sleep, and the next mystery may be even more disturbing. Until the next story, if you dare to come back.